I'm not exactly sure if that's action or not, but should we vamp a second to see until we go live?
Agency. It's agency.
Didn't really think this one through, I don't think. So how's everybody doing tonight? Well, why don't we kill some time here? How are we doing? Sunday evening.
Good.
I lost a whole hour today.
Yeah.
I lost an hour. It was tragic.
It really is tragic. I wish we had an hour.
Yes, so it looks like we are live. So wonderful. Welcome for anyone who's tuning in here. Angelella Editorial live stream. What is this? Our fourth one, I think? It's our fourth one. My name is Ross Angelella. Obviously, I'm not Kate. Kate was going to run the chat tonight, but because we lost an hour, she is now buried in the cave of our apartment with our young child, and locked horns in a battle for sleep. So I'm stepping in tonight to just prompt our super smart editors here with questions and guide us through. So before we get started, and we're going to be talking about desire tonight. Before we get started, let's go around, introduce yourselves, and tell us a little bit about either what you're reading, what you've seen recently that's been interesting.
I guess I'll start. You got to give us direction. You got a little more direction than that, Ross.
More direction.
Well, I'm Jay Whistler, and what am I reading right now? I just finished This Is Not a Love Letter by Kim Purcell, which I thought was really interesting because it's written in second person. So that was I really liked it. I think second person is a really hard voice to write in, and she did a great job with that. And I'm also reading Geraldine Brooks's March, which is the story of the Little Women's father as he goes off to serve as a chaplain in the Civil War, and so it's that story from his perspective. And I love Geraldine Brooks. I mean, she just is a master with language. So that's what I'm reading.
I'll go next. I'm Denise Santamaro, and I just this morning actually finished The Night Diary, which was so good. And Vera, and I'm going to say her name wrong. It's Hiranandani?
Hiranandani. You were right.
Oh, thank you. Yay! Sima, thank you. So I just finished that this morning. Loved it. And I just started the season of Six Malone by Kekla Magoon, which I'm also really enjoying. 2 middle grade books.
Well, I'll go. My name is Jen Bailey, and I finished Kekla's a couple of weeks ago. So right now I'm right at the end of The Parker Inheritance by Varian Johnson, and that has been delightful. Really like the flashbacks and the way that it's done in the book. I mean, in a truly visual sense, where some of the flashbacks are gray or darker colored, and the present tense are on whiter pages, but there's speckling around them. So I'm just about into where the pages are black, and I have anticipation just visually. It's a very interesting book. It's really been a lot of fun. And the next one up on my TBR pile is Lenore Appelhahn's the Manic Pixie Dream Boy Improvement Project, which I cannot wait for because I need a laugh. And I love trope busting.
I'm Suma, and the next one on my TBR is also Lenora's book. But the one that I'm reading right now is actually a nonfiction book called This Book is Gay, and written by James Dawson. So it's a brilliant, funny book. It's about everything queer, and also the author says that it's a book for everyone regardless of gender or sexual preference, and he calls it an instruction manual. So you're welcome, everyone.
That's great, guys. So let's jump into it then. Desire. We hear a lot when we're studying to be writers, when we're reading articles, when we're reading craft books. We hear terms like motivation, agency, desire, want, need. Simply, I guess, as a starting point of what we're talking about tonight, is the idea of a singular character's goal that's driving our story forward in terms of desire. So let's just start kind of big picture. Why is it that desire is so important in our work? And sort of conversely, how is it that a story suffers when you don't have a clear desire or there isn't one?
Well, for myself, I think without a desire line, you can really end up with a reactive character or a reactive main character instead of an active one. I think a desire line, even if small and maybe if it's not the one that comes through at the end of the book, or if it changes or whatever, you have to start with the main character needing or wanting something. That's going to be their motivation for the book to start. Otherwise, they're just going to be reacting to everything that happens around them.
I think it's important too, because that's sort of guiding all of our lives too, right? Like part of why we read is to explore how other people do things, or to learn about new things and learn how a character might approach a situation. And I think that, you know, we're looking for ourselves in characters, and one of the big things that motivates people is desire and want, and what they're pursuing and what they're fighting for and why they're fighting for it, which is, I think, getting more to desire than goal or anything like that. When you're talking about desire, you're talking about really why a character is actually going about and doing something.
Yeah, that's exactly what John Truby says in Anatomy of Story. He calls it the dramatic code, and he says that the dramatic code is really the process of every story, and that process is really all about desire. It's the thing that propels every living creature and gives them direction and propels them forward, as you said, Denise. And so it's not just about what propels them forward, but it's about what is your character willing to do to get what it is they desire, and what are the costs that character has to pay in order to get their desires too. That's what the story is. That's what the dramatic code is, according to Truby.
I love that. I love that. I think, I mean, just as people in general, we always constantly look at what shapes us as human beings and what gives us life, and that's what we seek for in our characters, and what life lessons and revelations and changes and growing convictions are what they think of when we ponder about them. And speaking to what John Truby said and what all of you said, how do they process their problems and make them personal? And um, I would like to quote Martine Levitt here, because she has a good exercise on desire. And one of the first things that she gave me, one of the first writing exercises she gave me in our MFA program was to write a letter from your character's point of view, uh, telling you what they want. And that was desire.
Mm-hmm.
It seems so simple. It
Yeah.
seems like such a simple thing, that exercise of writing a letter from the perspective of the character telling you what it is they want. That's something I teach university screenwriting, and that's like where we start, and it's also one of the most difficult things. So that's a good transition point, I think, to my next question. You all are writers as well as editors, so if it's different in your approach, share that. But as a writer and as an editor, how do you figure out what your character wants? What are things that you need to consider, think about? What are approaches that authors that you're working with, places you need to push them to explore in order to discover what the desire should be? what desire works best?
Well, I think the main thing is that you have to figure out what they need. And a need is not a desire. And that's the one thing that a lot of writers confuse those two things. A need is a lack. And you have to figure out what is lacking. It can be emotional, it can be physical, it can be psychological, whatever it is. But you have to figure out what is it that they're lacking, and that lack is what propels them forward. They're seeking to meet that need, and that's where the desire comes in. So when you figure out what your character needs, you'll figure out what it is that they want and what they're going to do to get that. That's the first step.
I was going to say, I often really feel that the first thing that my character tells me they desire is a lie. I mean, we all hide from sometimes from our hard truths. And so that first thing that they offer me, I'm like, yeah, but that's not really it. What is it really? And I think that happens a lot in some of the writing that I see is the author's not really probing into their character to find out what's the true desire. Well, I don't want to get picked on anymore. No, it's what is it really? Well, I don't want to. I want to look better. There's usually a deeper, more personal truth or desire behind the surface desire. So that's why that letter that Martine had to write, Suma, sounds great. She enhanced on that in a workshop that I was in and said, now, we had to have our character write us a letter about something that we as their author got wrong about them. And that really brought forward some of those deeper notions, deeper desires.
I feel like what you're almost talking about, Jen, is the way I think about it often is like external versus internal, right? Because like you have like that external goal of that thing that they want that's kind of tangible, that we can like track in a plot and all of that. But then you've got that internal desire line that's really getting into like what they really want. And they might not know what that is, I've described it to students in the idea of like a character who wants to get into this specific college, right? Like that's their goal. That's what they really, really want. But underneath that, what they don't realize what they want is actually their father's approval because their father went to that college and that's how they envision they'll get their father's approval, right? So when you understand that underlying, that internal desire line, you can start to see how that is going to start impacting all of their choices along the way towards getting to that external goal. And sometimes they don't even get that goal because that's not actually what they really want, right? They get what they want is down here.
Yeah. So that I think that instantly correlates to how your character is dissatisfied with their life. And speaking to what Jay said and what Jen said about what we don't know, really what makes them unhappy. And if, for example, if they're bored with their daily routine, or are they craving adventure, or is what is their goal? Is their goal to travel the world? I guess many of us know from firsthand experience that wanting to do something and actually taking the necessary actions to do that are two completely different beasts. And all too often there's something that holds us back. It could be fear, it could be some sort of insecurity or regret. So I guess it's that emotion that we have to tap into. And what is that one emotion that's holding them back from jumping that hurdle and changing something from a want to a need?
Good. Can anyone think of an example, either in their own work or in an experience in working with another author, where if it's your own work, you were progressing and the story wasn't working, and that's because you had been writing towards the wrong desire, and how you fixed that?
Yes. Do I have to go into it? Because it was my own. I had a negative desire line going on. And so it really made the main character very reactive and not active.
What do you mean when you say negative desire line?
It was a desire to not have this happen. It's like, what can I do to make sure this doesn't happen or that this doesn't transpire? And so instead of finding change, the main character was doing everything they could to keep the status quo, which is okay. Sometimes that is a goal, but and sometimes that is a desire. But it was really making things not progress how they needed to. At some point, I think you can start that way, maybe in some cases, but at some point, the main character needs to turn it around and start being much more proactive. So I had to reevaluate what was just what you said, and what you've all said is what's that internal desire line?
Yeah, I have this challenge with every manuscript. I don't know what to do. So, but anyway, I suffer from a sagging middle syndrome, and
don't we all?
Don't we all? So I think I kind of know what my character wants when I begin the novel, but then there are so many distractions, and I lure away from giving the character a strong goal-driven action in the middle. And one of the things that I learned during our MFA program was what the side writing exercises that Amanda Jenkins gave us, and those were great exercises because we specifically did side writing exercises on desire lines, and those exercises, and what I got from that was
strong
a lot about the
action
character
in the middle
that just did not go into the novel. But
one of the things that I learned
during our
deeper
MFA
into their
program
desire
was
lines
what
and
the side writing exercises
inner deeper
that Amanda
motivations
Jenkins
and
gave us,
what
propels them to do what they want to do, whatever
those
they're
were
doing.
great exercises
And
because
we did. We
that
specifically did
that helped put the
side
story
writing
back in
exercises
place
on
and,
desire lines,
get it back
and
into
those exercises.
into
And
the
what I
thread.
got from that was
strong
a lot about
goal-driven
the
action in
character
the middle.
that
I'm
did not
curious
go
to
into the
hear
novel. But
one of
everyone
things
else
that I learned during our
deeper
MFA
into their
program
desire
was
lines,
what
and
addressing
the side
desire
writing
lines,
exercises
inner
that
deeper
Amanda
motivations
Jenkins gave us.
I think it always
What-
comes back to
and
backstory.
propels them to
Have I
do
done
what
enough
they want to do,
backstory?
whatever
Have I
they're
actually
doing.
great
gone
exercise
deep enough to
because
understand
we did
that
specifically
moment
did that
where,
helped put the
you know,
story
because as
back
kids
in
we have these
places
big
on
dreams and
desire
we,
lines,
you know, and this is a human thing. We think
those
everything's
exercises
possible.
and what I
So
got
when's the
from
point when you stop
was
believing
a
that
lot
lie?
about the action
And
in the
when's this
middle.
point?
Yeah,
I
I'm
think
curious
it's
to
Mr.
hear
Bird
what
who
one of
says
everyone
things
else that I
that lie
learned
start
during
moving
our
deeper
MFA
into the lie
program
detector
was
was
what
addressing
addressing
side
if
writing
I haven't
inner
figured
deeper
that out
motivations
yet, I
and
don't
gave us.
have. I think it always comes back to
and
backstory. I don't have
them to
have I
do
done enough
what they
backstory?
want
I don't know what
whatever
have I
they're
actually
doing.
so
Great
getting
exercises because
past
we
then
did
those points of
that specifically
moment
did that helped
where,
put the
you know,
story
because as
back
kids
in
we have these
places
big
on
dreams
desire
where,
lines,
you know, and this is a human thing where we think
those
things everything's
exercises
possible.
and what I
So
got
when's the
from
point
that
when you stop
was
believing
a
that
lot
lie?
about the action
And
in the
when's this
middle.
point?
I'm
I did
curious
not
to
go
hear
further.
what one of
I found
everyone else that I
that
learned
lies that are
during our
deeper
MFA
into the
program
program
was
enough.
what
Addressing
addressing
side
side
writing. If I haven't
inner
figured
deeper
that out yet, I
motivations
don't
gave us.
have. I think it always comes back to backstory. Have I done enough backstory? I don't know
whatever
have I
they're
actually
doing.
gone
Great
getting
exercises
past
because we
then
did
those
How
points
far
of
that specifically
moment
did that
where,
helped put
how
the
far
you know,
story
because as
back
kids
in
we have these
places
big
on
dreams
desire
where,
lines,
you know, and this is a human thing where we
those
think
exercises
everything's
and
possible.
what I
So
got
when's the
from
point when you stop
that
believing
was a
that
lot
lie?
about the action in the
Once this is
middle.
your point,
I'm
I
curious
didn't
to
go
hear
further.
one of
I found
everyone else that I
that lies
learned
that are
during our
deeper into
MFA
the
program
program
was
enough.
what addressing
If
side
I haven't
inner
figured
deeper
that out yet, I
motivations
don't
gave us.
have. I think it always comes back to
and
backstory.
propels them to
Have I
do
done
what
enough
they want to do
backstory?
whatever
Have I
they're
actually
doing.
so
Great
getting
exercises
past understand
did
forward. Do you have
that
a time
specifically
that
that helped
how
solve
as a
that
kid we have
desire
dreams
and
where
get it back.
human thing
specifically talking about
those
exercise
and what I
so when
guess
someone stops
drawing a
doing
long
it,
call an action in the middle.
yeah,
I'm
understood
that I learned the external part and
I haven't figured that out yet. I don't have more than I can figure out what the actually so getting back and
do you have a time
as a kid we have dreams where human thing so when someone stops doing it, I've noticed I haven't figured that out yet. I don't have more than I can figure out what the so getting back and
do you have a time
as a kid we have dreams where human thing so when someone stops doing it,
what you were saying about you don't even know that you have that underlying as long as that is staying consistent throughout this whole thing, and the character growth is consistent with that, if that desire line changes and is still character, then the mistakes is still and the story is that makes sense. What you were saying about you don't even know that you have that underlying as long as that is staying consistent throughout this whole thing, and the character growth is consistent with that, if that desire line changes and is still character, then the mistakes is still and the story is that makes sense. What you were saying about you don't even know that you have that underlying as long as that is staying consistent throughout this whole thing, and the character growth is consistent with that, if that desire line changes and is still character, then the mistakes is still and the story is that makes sense. What you were saying about you don't even know that you have that underlying as long as that is staying consistent throughout this whole thing, and the character growth is consistent with that, if that desire line changes and is still character, then the mistakes is still and the story is that makes sense. What you were saying about you don't even know that you have that underlying as long as that is staying consistent throughout this whole thing, and the character growth is consistent with that, if that desire line changes and is still character, then the mistakes is still and the story is that makes sense. What you were saying about you don't even know that you have that underlying as long as that is staying consistent character growth is consistent with that. That paradigm changes and is still characterized in a stage still in a story that makes sense. You know, it's understanding about as long as the stage and character growth is consistent with that paradigm changes and is still characterized in a stage still in a story that makes sense. You know, it's understanding about as long as the stage and character growth is consistent with that paradigm changes and is still characterized in a stage still in a story that makes sense. You know, it's understanding about as long as the stage and character growth is consistent with that paradigm changes and is still characterized in a stage still in a story that makes sense. You know, it's understanding about as long as the stage and character growth is consistent with that paradigm changes and is still characterized in a stage still in a story that makes sense. You know, it's understanding as long as the stage and character growth is consistent with that paradigm changes and is still characterized in a stage still in a story that makes sense. You know, it's understanding as long as the stage and character growth is consistent with that paradigm changes and is still characterized in a stage still in a story that makes sense. You know, it's understanding we have to be sadistic. We really do. We do. Because otherwise there's no story, there's no conflict. It's just changes and is still characterized in a stage still in a story that makes sense. You know, it's
how can you go deeper? Well, I want to be light. Okay, we'll go deeper. Like, what is it? You know, I have social anxiety, and I'm FOMO, or I don't know, like whatever it is. I want to very specific. But going the deeper, and the deeper that you go, the more it hurts, and the more it hurts, the more you know. I think that the way to get to that hurt, and the way to get to the point where you are really throwing the character through the ringer and making it work to get this desire, is to make that desire really important. It has to be so important to them. They have to need that pain in order to make it through the next point of their life, to survive, in a sense, whether that's a physical survival or an emotional survival.
You have to keep thwarting that desire. You have to keep saying, nope, you're not going to get it. Now think again. Right? And that's just keep mining, keep digging at it. Yeah.
Or give it to them, but in a completely different way than what they expected. Or give it to them and have it be like not what they wanted at all. I think that Raimi Nightingale by Kate DiCamillo does this really, really well. I think it's in the first chapter, in the first couple pages. The main character is like, I'm entering this pageant because I want to win the pageant because then my dad will see it and he'll come back.
Right.
And this is I love it because so often it's like this nebulous thing, the want or desire, and she just like lays it right on the page. And then, spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't read it yet, she gives it to her towards the end of the book, and it's not what Raimi really wanted. And I think that that's a good show of like that external, she wants this thing, but really what she wants is under here. And so here, I'll give you this thing so that it shows you that's not actually what you want. What you wanted was over here, and what you needed was over here.
What I'm
So
hearing.
interesting.
Go ahead, Suma. Go ahead.
Yeah, I thought, just the process of finding that desire line is so interesting. I love Denise's example of Kate DiCamillo's book. I think one of the recent books that I read was Wish Tree by Catherine Applegate, and it was really interesting to see how she arrived at finding the desire of her characters even before she started writing the book. She said, in summer of 2016, he was frustrated about the way things were going in the country, and she wanted to make a small plea for civility, and she wanted to keep it simple and accessible to young readers, and that was her goal even before she started writing Wish Tree. And and if you read the novel, it actually accomplished her goals and her desire in a very sweet and accessible way for younger readers. And the themes throughout the book, in terms of how the animals are named and the vocabulary she uses, and even just the message, is so positive and enriching for readers. So if now, Wish Tree is actually a book it's about a tree, a red oak tree, um, and people write their wishes on a piece of cloth, and they tie them to the branches, and um, uh, everyone thinks that the red tree has actually seen it all, and until a new family arrives, and then not everyone is as welcoming to the family as the tree itself, and then that's how the story begins. It's amazing that um, her desire for her characters actually came from what was happening around her, and why do people treat each other a certain way. And that's obviously not an easy question to answer for adults or children, because it's very easy to feel angry about certain emotions and certain things that happen. But she wanted to ventilate and write a book that is exactly how authors should ventilate certain emotions, and she brought it out, and it was very successful.
What listening to you all talk, it just brings to mind David Mamet's 3 questions that he posed in his memo that he wrote to the writing staff and television show The Unit. For those of you who haven't read it, you can find it online. But basically, he co-created this show, and then he left the show on a high note, and then it started to tank. And so from his home, he pounded out a memo to the writing staff that essentially is a master class in storytelling, also super condescending depending on how you read it. But he poses that every scene should have 3 questions, and in fact, as a starting point for a lot of new projects that with writers that I work with, I often say answer these 3 questions and use that as a jumping off point. And it just made me think of that, which is who wants what happens if they don't get it, and why now. And if you can't answer one of those 3, then there's more work that needs to be done, either backstory or clarity of the desire or the inner need. And I think everything you guys are talking about, the consequences, the stakes, I think also need to be balanced there. Moving on, because I've heard it pop up, and it's another term that we hear a lot when we're talking about goals, when we're talking about desire, is this idea of agency. A lot of people like to use the word agency. Yes, Jay. So what's the difference between agency and desire? What are we talking about?
Oh, can I answer this one, please? Please. Okay. Agency is not desire. And I think that's another one that writers kind of make this mistake of conflating the two. And agency is the character's ability to act on his or her own behalf. If someone is always there to either make decisions or swoop in and solve problems, then that character does not have agency. They can still have desires. They can still have a desire line, but they're not acting in their own best interest or on their own behalf, and they're not moving themselves forward in any way. It's one of the main problems that I have with, and you guys are all going to hate me on this one, The Dark is Rising. I can't stand this book. I can't stand this book because every time Will gets into a spot of trouble, Merriman is always there to help him out. And when the final battle happens with the rider, does Will fight him? No. Some dude named the Hunter shows up and does the final battle for him, and Will and Merriman stand in the background and they just watch it all happen. And Will does nothing. He's never in trouble. He's never in danger. He's just watching it all, from some vantage point of safety. And Will serves no purpose. He gathered a couple of signs. There are some signs that he had to gather, and then he turns them over to somebody else. He does nothing with the signs. There's no agency. Anybody could have done that. Anybody could have gathered up those signs and then handed them off to somebody else. Will has no agency in this story. He's never in danger, and it's ridiculous, and I hated it. That's agency.
So what are your thoughts, though?
Yeah, tell us how you really felt.
I thought I was pretty clear.
I love agency, and I remember not really knowing what that was until we went off to the MFA program and looking it up and figuring it all out. And I think so often this is what I see a lot sometimes is you've got this main character who's very pleasant. And that's the viewpoint that the story is happening through. And I often will ask my authors, well, who do you connect with most? Who do you think is most like you? And it's usually that main character, which is why they are very pleasant and they don't do much. They usually give themselves some sassy sidekick who's brilliant and gets to have all the fun because while they stay very secure and they stay very safe, and they don't have to suffer any stakes and they don't have to suffer any consequences. And somebody else is helping them get that desire line resolved or find out what they need. And it's just interesting because you tell them, you're keeping yourself safe. Step out, get out of your basement. I shouldn't say that because that's where I am, but let's get the character moving. Let's get them acting on their own behalf and for their own cause. They need to do that.
Exactly.
I see that a lot as well, and it reminds me of anyone who is a fan of the show Friends. There's the episode where they go to London, and the character Joey has a map of London, and he puts the map on the ground and steps into the map to figure out how to navigate London. And I often find with student work, when that happens, which happens a lot, right? It's almost as if they're trying to figure out their story, and it's like they're stepping into their story, and the character is just a proxy of themselves, and they're watching everything happen because they're trying to figure out what the story is, that they're not even really sure, let alone the character. So I think a lot of times too, if you have an agency problem, there's a lot of other things you can throw at your character to kind of figure that out. But you guys are raising a lot of good questions, which is kind of our next question that's popping up here too, which is about other characters, whether they're secondary characters or they're antagonists. What about those goals? Should we spend time developing desires and goals for secondary characters or antagonists, or is it all meaningless and pointless?
I do not think it's meaningless and pointless.
Not
I will
at
jump
all.
in on this one. I do
No.
not. That
No.
said, though,
No.
I do think that when you're dealing with secondary characters, it's really important to remember that the more time you spend on a character, the more we're going to expect of that character. So if you give a character a ton of time with their, like, what they're after and all of this, and then they don't really serve a point in the story, it kind of feels like a plot device and not necessarily like the character is a part of this story. I think that every character wants something. Every character wants something, but it could be, I mean, again, if you have a character that is just like popping in, maybe they just want this character to bum them a cigarette. And so they bum them a cigarette and then they leave, and they have a small purpose. They give a piece of information or something, but they still wanted something. I think when it comes to your antagonist, though, if you have like a main villain or antagonist, they should definitely have a reason for why they're doing what they're doing. They should definitely have some goals and some desires and some wants of their own. And I think the real challenge is as a writer, stepping outside of that of your main character a little bit to look at the story through that antagonist point of view, so that you can provide some depth there that makes it a challenge for your reader. If an antagonist is, I think we talked about this a little bit with villains a couple of weeks ago, that if a villain is just straight evil, it's not as challenging to a reader as when that person maybe has some good points, or maybe isn't all bad, or maybe they really believe in what they're going after. And so, yeah, I would say that every character wants something, but you just have to be careful of the more time you spend with that want, the more we're going to expect of that character in the story.
Yeah,
Oh,
I mean, let's
Denise,
face
you
it. Nobody.
absolutely nailed
Sorry.
it. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just
Go
going to
ahead,
say,
Jen.
nobody just wants to support their friend. We all want to support our friend, but we also have our own desires and needs, and nobody wants just to be a dick. I mean, really. So the villain has to have a purpose. They have to have that, and I think that although the ultimate show for me is if this can happen, is can you write fanfic about the secondary character? Is there enough there? I mean, talking about Raimi Nightingale, Kate DiCamillo went along and wrote Louisiana's Way Home, or Finds Her Way Home. Mm-hmm. I mean, she took that secondary character because that character had a desire. That character had enough. I mean, true, in the Raimi Nightingale story, she's supporting her friend, but there was enough there. She built enough into that character that she could have a story of her own. And I think that that's kind of what you were talking about, Denise. Don't let them take over, right? But maybe give them enough where if you start thinking about that character, that character's viewpoint, there could be a whole other story there.
It's very dangerous, though. That's when you
Yes,
start getting into like, wait, who is my main character? If you do
Right.
too much work on the secondary characters, you can start to go down the path of like, I have many main characters. What do I do with this? And then you maybe totally change the format, and maybe you don't have a main character. Maybe you have a multi-viewpoint story. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe you realize that Sam Gamgee was the hero all along.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think that there's some. Oh, go ahead, Jay.
I was going to say the other thing that you have to remember is that, with the antagonist's goal has to do, it has to serve to thwart the protagonist. So either the antagonist's goal has to be in direct opposition to the main character's desire, or it has to be exactly the same. So, for example, if like in the Hunger Games, her antagonists had exactly the same goal. They all had to survive the Hunger Games, and in order to survive the Hunger Games, they had to murder each other. So that same goal it's at the same time, it is the same goal, but it's also in direct opposition. So that makes for an incredible story with very high stakes. So that's what you have to think about when you're creating your antagonist goal. Make sure that goal is one that will put obstacles in your protagonist's path.
Right. So, even the best of protagonists can't really carry the entire story. We need a cast of supporting characters, and that could be the antagonist, and also the allies and enemies and everyone, who are every bit as complex and rounded and interesting in their own right. They don't need to have their own journeys as the main character. I like to quote Robert McKee, because he says in his book, in his craft book Story, that the protagonist actually creates the rest of the cast. So all the characters are in a story first and foremost because of the relationship that they strike to the protagonist, and also the way each of them helps to delineate the dimensions of a protagonist's complex nature. So, in other words, now, does that mean that we need a complete character arc for every single supporting character in our story? Definitely not. But many of our supporting characters will have comparatively tiny roles, perhaps only appearing for a few scenes in the novel. But fleshing out an entire character arc for all of them would land somewhere between crazy and that will make you crazy, So it may be an overkill. So if we're going to ask, if we're only going to ask one question, then we want to find out if they're little monsters, or if there's anything, if is every single one of them related to the protagonist, and in some way or the other, are they directly affecting them, or are they indirectly affecting them, and are they helping the protagonist get what he or she or they want, or are they stopping the protagonist from getting what they want? So that's an important question to ask them.
That's great. I think we're winding down here. We've got about 2 more questions I think that would be really helpful to get to. One that I think about a lot, and certainly is raised a lot with people that I work with, is, okay, so I have this main character. I've spent a very long time with them. I've spent a very long time developing their backstory, figuring out what makes them tick, what they want, what their obstacles are. And now I'm getting to the end of the book. Do they succeed in their goal? Do they obtain the desire? Or should I have it not be obtained and failed, or should I leave it open-ended? What are your thoughts on that? What are some examples that you can point to, maybe, if you can think of any? Let's start there.
I don't know if they'll get their goal, but they should always get what they need. Like, I think that it gets back to the difference between like what they want versus what they need. I think that an author should know what a character needs at the end of a story in order to end this story and sort of move into the next, like the whole point of this was to sort of move into the next phase of their life, or their, what's happening after that, right? And so they get what they need in order to be able to do that. But that doesn't necessarily mean they get what they want. Doesn't mean that they necessarily get what they were hoping to get out of this whole journey that they've gone on. And I find that it's more important that the need is met rather than actually the goal being achieved.
Absolutely. It all comes down to the stones. You can't always get what you want. But you have to have a satisfaction. Now we're back. So just listen to the Rolling Stones, you'll be fine. But there really does need to be, you need to bring about some kind of emotionally satisfying end, which, as you're saying, it can be that the need gets met, not necessarily the want.
Yeah, and I think that, like, especially if you're writing a mystery or a suspense or something like that, where you've kept your reader on tenterhooks the entire time, and not everything is going to work out the way the reader expects. You have to have that twist in there. In some, like, I just read a book recently called Behind Her Eyes, and I thought I had this book figured out, and it's a very suspenseful book, and I was sure that I had the twist figured out, and then we get to the end, and the main character does not, she does not get what she wants. And yet the end was so satisfying because the twist was just phenomenal, and did not see it coming. And it was really incredible. And so I think that when you do something like that, and you can keep the reader guessing, but you also give the reader something that makes them go, how did you do that? Then you've done something really, really incredible, and you've subverted expectations, and you've nailed it. So yeah, you can really screw your poor main character over if you need to, in order to really give the reader a good experience.
And I think it's different depending on the audience that you're writing for. I think that, like, the way you handle that kind of thing.
Right.
Jacqueline Woodson, I got to hear her speak a couple of years ago, and she said that, I believe it was maybe an early editor she worked with, or an agent, who said to her that one of the biggest difference between young adult literature and adult literature is a sense of hope. That when you're writing for young readers, that there's almost always a sense of hope at the end of a story. So even if they didn't get what they wanted, even if they didn't get that thing that they desired, there's a sense of hope and possibility that's still there, which you don't have to have in adult literature. You can end on a really terrible note, and it's totally acceptable. But that when you're writing for young readers, that hope needs to be there in some form or fashion.
Yeah, and in middle grade too, there's a lot. It's justice. Was justice served? Because it's that broader. They tend to have that broader. What is my place in the world? Not so much, or what is the world? How do I get in there? And so, in a lot of middle grade books, they might not necessarily get what they desire, but was justice served? And then, so there's that emotional satisfaction.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Then, I read somewhere that a character's preoccupation with their want is what creates their flaw, and mostly what characters need is something that lies under the surface, and there are very few things that human beings actually need in order to be happy. And this goes back to the one thing that Denise talked about over and over. The things that we need can actually be distilled to one single thing, and that is love. So, so by that, we don't have to actually keep writing romance novels, but we're talking about compassion and love of self and love of others, and just weaving the want and need into two sides of the same coin. And a good example for that is Jen Bailey's book, A Friend for Henry.
Oh, yeah, that's so true.
So true. So true.
Yeah, because all Henry wants is a friend. And it's a great example for desire lines, and also what exactly a character needs. All he wanted was love.
Thank you so much.
This is a perfect moment. Jen, pitch your book. Where can we find it?
Everywhere.
What's it called?
I don't think I even have one.
Oh, I have a copy right in front of me. Hang on.
It's called A Friend for Henry, and he just came out a little while ago. And
all right, I'll talk so you can see my
you
face.
do it.
Friend for Henry. It's very lovely. It's so beautiful. The illustrations are amazing, as well as the writing.
Mika Song did a beautiful job. She just created him. I tell you, when I got to see the sketches, when she was trying to decide what Henry looked like, I saw him. It was like, oh, here's the baby I didn't have. It was great. It was great. As I said, it was kind of like seeing the sonogram, seeing those first sketches.
That's a good way to describe it. So yes, definitely. If you're in the market for a picture book, Jen Bailey's book is out everywhere now, and you can get it. You can also go back and look at wonderful pictures on social media that were posted from a launch party where there was a bunch of Angelella editors
Yes.
together, which was very nice.
Yes.
So
we had a great time.
It looked like you did. It looked like you did.
They're really sweet.
Let's end with common problems that you see as editors in work. I know we've touched on this a little bit, but I think it's just sort of a nice place to end for anyone who's closing out this video. What are common mistakes that you see, common problems, and most importantly, what you would immediately say, simplistically say, here's what you need to do to fix it?
Confusing need and desire, and not giving enough agency. Those are the two things that I see most often. And I think that the most simplistic way to convey that to an author is basically just to say, you need to think about what is it that your character lacks, and that lack is the need, and how they fill that lack is the desire. And then agency is, how your character actually solves the problems by himself or herself without having somebody else step in and do it all for them. So that's how I would approach it.
I would say that having like that tangible goal without having something underneath it. I think that we go a lot to like that I want this thing that I can hold in my hand, or that the character could hold in their hand, but not enough has been done underneath it to show why it's important to that character and why it's vital to that character's journey. And that to me gets down to the emotional stuff, which I think it's hard to go to the emotional stuff. That's the stuff that breaks your own heart, right? Like, so and that's the stuff that when we get into, I think that what I see often is that it's hard to go to those deeper emotional places, because as a human, it's hard to go to those places. And when we start to look at those things in our writing and in our art, we have to look at them in ourselves. And that's challenging. Nobody wants to go to some deep emotional place while they're writing, but sometimes the best things are when you cry in the middle of trying to write a scene, because you realize like how deeply you have connected emotionally with that character, with that journey or that story. And so my immediate thing would be to say, what are you afraid of? What is the thing that's stopping you from going deep, as you were saying, Jen? Where is that block for you, and how can you suss a little bit of that out so that you can get to that deep emotional place to make the journey towards that tangible goal even more exciting to read and even more engaging to read.
So that's probably much nicer than what, because I just tell people, stop protecting yourself, stop it. It's instinct to protect ourselves from those emotions and to protect ourselves from those places. But you're not going to understand it unless you're willing to pick at the scab.
I guess one of the common things that I'm seeing in manuscripts right now is how fascinated writers are about describing a character's daily life. No doubt the character is fascinating and interesting, but we'll have to keep in mind that as the authors, we are going to be slightly prejudiced. So, prejudiced.
Biased.
So biased. Yes, let's say biased. So, readers would want to see characters in action, and unless they're going to find characters with strong desire, everyday activities can be a little less interesting, and they would rather watch a home video than read that scene. So that's something that writers would want to keep in mind. You want to give your characters solid desire lines that would keep them running through the story, scene by scene, so that you'll never have to worry about boring readers.
That puts it all together. Yeah, with what Jay was saying too about agency. If they have a strong desire, if you give them enough agency to keep them running towards that desire.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do when we're workshopping stories, even at the fundamental level, before they've even gone off to write it, is I will stand in front of them as they pitch me their story and just continue to say, "So what?" as many times until they can get down to the thing that's like, okay, so they want $1 million. So what? Okay, well, they need $1 million. Okay, because of this reason. Okay, so what? So what? So what? So what? And I think that's sort of what we've all been talking about. This is good. This is all good stuff. I guess it's next Sunday. We're going to be talking about what are we talking about? Conflict. I think conflict is next Sunday, right? So next Sunday is going to be 9 p.m. You can tune in live then. But before we close out here, why don't we go around, tell folks where they can find you online and social media, and promote anything you may have going on or coming up. Denise, let's start with you.
It's so funny you say that, because I'm just looking up on Twitter to see what my handle is, because I can never remember.
See, I've already opened up all that information. It's on my other screen here.
It's smart. You're smarter than I am, Ross. So my handle on Twitter is DA Santomaro. My last name is SANTOMAURO. That's my handle on Twitter. I believe it's also my Instagram handle. My website is denisesantomaro.com. Yep, pretty sure it's .com. And coming up for me, I am gonna bake a cake coming up soon. I have no big class or I'm going on a personal writing retreat soon.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that. But other than that, nothing much for me. Making jokes on Twitter. That's about the best that I got at the moment.
Jay?
You can follow me at Jay Whistler, JAYWHISTLER on Twitter. And my website is jwhistler.com. And later this month, I will be at the Association of Writing Programs in Portland, Oregon, doing a panel discussion with Jen Bailey and a couple of other VCFA people, and we're going to be doing a presentation on, it's called Making Light: Humor's Serious Place in Children's Literature. And that's for the end of this month.
Great. Suma?
So you can find me on Twitter at Suma, SUMA_V for Victor, S for Sierra. And I will also be at the AWP, Association of Writers and Writing Programs conference the end of the month, March 27th to the 30th. And I'm going to be speaking on a panel about creating a new traditional and gender identity. So we're going to be talking about children's literature and how it has placed itself at the forefront of deconstructing sexuality and gender identities. And we'll examine some of the unique positions that writers are in to define these new values and traditions, and how they're helping creating a growing acceptance among all gender identities.
Great. Thank you. Jen Bailey.
Well, I think I've already shown up enough. So I've got a book out, and you can find that anywhere. But I'll be with Jay on the humor panel at AWP. While I'm in Portland, I am going to be reading and signing books on Wednesday, which I think is the 27th, at Children's Bookshop. So that ought to be fun. It's their reading time at, I think, 10:30 in the morning. So bring some coffee and let's have some fun. Let's play Legos or something. And what else? So I'm Jen Bailey on Twitter. That's JENNBAILEY. And my website is jenbailey.com. But you can find all that on the Angelella Editor's website as well.
Excellent. And actually, now that I'm reading through Kate's copious notes here that she typed out for herself, I realized that I gave misinformation. So I apologize. It looks like our next chat, the conflicts chat, is going to be Tuesday, March 26th at 9 p.m. for anyone who's watching this in real time. And then we also are starting a new Twitter conversation hashtag. So Word Nerd Chat, hashtag Word Nerd Chat is started last week. My days all blur together, so I think it was last week, but I can't tell if I laugh or I'm crying sometimes because I'm so tired because of the baby. So I think it was this last week, but it's super fun and you should check it out. Hashtag Word Nerd Chat. Next one I think is Monday, April 1st, 9 p.m. In terms of Angelella Editorial website, you can find out much more extensive bios and everyone's specialties and what they like to work with and where their expertise lie at angelellaeditorial.com. If you're curious how to spell Angelella, the easiest way to remember it is Angel and then the girl's name Ella, Angelella. Angelella Editorial. Twitter at Angel Editors. You can also jump on any of our chats on Twitter through the hashtag Angel Editors. Facebook at Angelella Editorial. And I believe Kate created an Instagram.
She did
today.
Yay! Yeah.
So unofficially, I think it's Angelella Editorial, but there's an Instagram as well.
What about you, Ross?
Oh, yeah. So sure, Twitter, JR, and then Angelella, JR Angelella. Find me there.
Agency. Agency.
Yeah. and a final note, just to sort of humble myself to what everyone was talking about. Don't do this. Don't write an adult novel with a young adult narrator, protagonist, who at the end suffers pure hopelessness because you will spend 3 years trying to find someone to buy it. And then when one person decides to publish it, you will receive hate mail for about 6 to 8 months after from angry kids who pick up the book because it's wrongly advertised as YA.
Oh no.
Hope. It's the difference. It's so true.
So as evidence and proof that these editors are brilliant, don't do what I did, do what they say. Until next time, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you.